It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's Ryan Millsy. Back to Hometown Commander for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to brew the Magic world. As always, that deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As always, I was greatly appreciate if you can interact with the video in any way, like, comment, subscribe. Check out the links in the description. I really appreciate it. But today, we doing more of a random commander, right? Not from ACR, not from Modern Horizons 3, and we've got our Bloomburrow stuff starting next week. But I picked Raggadragga really because I thought Modern Horizons 3 had some interesting new stuff as far as mana dorks go, right? Fanatic Aronis and things like that. And I was like, what would be a commander that cares about mana dorks? And I was like, well, Raggadragga was, right? And I never covered Raggadragga for the channel. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to do Raggadragga. So let's do it. Raggadragga Gorguts boss is a 4-mana Gruul human board. It says each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2. Whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, we're going to untap it. And then whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature, it gets +7/+7, gains trample until a turn. Raggadragga, as an idea, is a really fun commander. You give your mana dorks, or creatures that tap for mana, just slightly more value in them being a little bit bigger. And the cool part is you get to attack with them and then untap them, meaning that you could still use their mana to cast spells. If you cast a spell and 7 more mana was spent to cast it, well, you get to untap a creature and give it +7/+7 trample in a turn, meaning that we could be hitting hard. So really the deck's going to revolve around our mana dorks, things that are going to be making mana, some big mana spells that either can, one, just use that threshold for Raggadragga to make things with trample, or big mana spells that can even help us get stuck in, do that combat thing, do that Gruul thing, and get to smashing. So let's talk about mana dorks. We have things like Birds of Paradise, just tapping for 1 mana and being in the air. Circle of Dreams Druid taps for a green for each creature we control. Elvish Archdruid is a elf that taps for a green for each elf we control. And this is a good time to mention that a lot of the mana dorks in Magic, especially when we're talking here in green, are elves. So there's going to be a small elf sub-theme as far as all of these mana dorks being elves. We're not paying that off too much, but it is important that for some of these, like Elvish Archdruid, hey, it will tap for more mana the more of these guys that we have out. Fanatic Aronis, that new one from Modern Horizons 3 I talked about. Tapping for a green or tapping for 4 green if we control a creature power 4 or greater. Remember, Raggadragga does have 4 or greater, so that's great. And then what's the cool part is we can eternalize a Fanatic to get it back. Gwenna, tap for a 2 mana in any combination of colors. We can only use it to cast creatures or activate abilities of creatures. And if we cast a creature spell with mana or power 5 or greater, we put a counter on it and untap it, so we can potentially use it multiple times each turn. Marwyn, whenever an elf comes in, you put a counter on it, amount of green equal to its power. So again, a way that it can grow itself, but if we make it bigger, right, with something like Raggadragga's ability, then it can tap for more green, more green mana and keep getting bigger and bigger. Priest of Titania, a green for each elf on the battlefield. And again, I'm not showing things like Llanowar elves or Finhorn elves that are 1 mana, elves that tap for 1 mana, but they're there, and that's the lion's share of the things we have. Ruby taps for red or green, does have haste and can get a little bit bigger if we control a creature power 4 or greater when it attacks. And then Selvala, probably one of my favorite mana dorks in the high end. Whatever creature TBs, if it has the greatest power on the battlefield, you can creature's controller draws a card. But for green mana and tap it, you add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Selvala and some of our other mana dorks will start to get potentially game ending and combo ending once we get towards the end. We'll talk about some of the fun ways we can take advantage of untapping these when they attack. But okay, I didn't show off all the mana dorks because there's really honestly too many of them. But let's talk about big mana spells, 7+ mana spells that we can cast to take advantage of this ability. First off, we have things like Nissa, Ascended Animist. Her -7 is until end of turn. Creatures we control get +1/+1 for each forest we control and gain trample. A way to have a big overrun effect for our board. But every turn we could just be making a token until we get there. But hey, that's a way to kind of get our board ready to go and go in for a big strike. Volborn Tyrant says whenever it or another creature power 4 or greater comes in, we gain 3 life and draw a card. And when it dies, we get a copy of it. Again, here's a way to get a big creature and get Raggadragga's ability to go off in the same turn. Awaken the Woods is an X spell that just makes X 1/1 forest, dryad, land creature tokens. The cool part here is All of those are creatures with a mana ability, meaning that all of them will get buffed by Raggadragga. And if we could cast that, X is 5 or more, well, then we're going to get Raggadragga's ability for it. And the X spells are an important thing to think about. We have Crackle with Power. Light off a bunch of damage to our opponents and give somebody that buff. When we have a few creatures that can just make a ton of mana on their own, just the one creature, spells like Crackle with Power get a little bit easier to cast for larger and larger amounts. Finale Devastation could search our deck for a creature card with mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield, and if X is 10 or more, creatures get +X/+X and haste until end of turn. Well, of course, there's a couple of very popular green creatures that we can go get with Finale Devastation, Crater Hoof, things like that. But the point there is you hit it for 5 or more to get that threshold for a dragon. Now, ideally, you want it for 10 or more so that you get the big buff for your whole squad. But it just goes to show you that here's another spell that we can still get value off of. Insurrection for 8 mana gains control of all creatures until end of turn, and we get to attack with them. A cool way to get that buff from Raggadragga. Take everybody's things and take a big attack in towards our opponents. Jai's Immolating Inferno and Comet Storm, just ways to dump a bunch of mana into one spell, still trigger Raggadragga, but get some damage off on our opponents. And the Decree of Savagery, 9 mana to put 4 Crowners in each creature we control. Just feels really good. Again, the 9 mana, meaning Raggadragga goes off, something gets untapped, and now our board's even bigger, and then all we're looking for is a Trampler or something to really push us in for 8 for big damage. Chroma's Memorial for 7 mana. Creatures we control have Flying, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, and Pearl, Black, and Red. Probably a game ender depending on how wide we're at just by itself. Getting us in the air and giving us Trample and First Strike means we're probably just going to, with a flat +2/+2 buff plus anything else we can accomplish is going to be hard for our opponents to deal with. And the best part is it gives all of our creatures haste, so the more we have, the more we're making every turn, or the ways that we can kind of branch off the strategy to make more tokens if you want to, or 2 different things. I think Memorial is one of those cards that's going to help us end the game, as well as something like City on Fire. Source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, deals triple that damage instead. This paired with that +7/+7 and trample buff to a creature could be very deadly, right? To our opponents, it only takes 1 or 2 creatures hitting with that +7/+7 trample with something like this out to just really get in and end a big, to end a game outright or get close to ending a game. And I think the thing that people aren't going to expect that +7/+7 to hit too hard, but when you start realizing that if we pick the right creature, that +7/+7 is compounded by Raggadragga, already giving them +2/+2, and it's not going to be hard to have creatures hitting for a ton of power. But we're a Gruul deck, and at the end of the day, we're going to try to win via combat. So let's start with the ways we're going to get stuck in. Anzarag is a really fun idea here. When a group becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat, there's additional combat. And for 7 mana, we can make it so it has to be blocked this turn if able. This works well with Raggadragga because remember that whenever our mana dorks attack, they untap, meaning that they're already attacking. They could then tap again and pay for Anzarag's ability, forcing it to be blocked, and start a potentially multiple, if not as many combats needed to end the game scenario where we could just start swinging in towards our opponents. Craterhoof, of course, the behemoth of our format, and I mean that pun. Whenever it ETBs, creatures we control get trample and +X/+X till end turn, where X is the number of creatures we control. The wider we go, the harder Craterhoof hits. It gets to attack itself, and it is 8 mana, so it's going to count for Raggadragga's trigger. Enraze is a great close second. 8 mana for a 7/7 with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and when it ETBs, other creatures get +2/+2 Vigilance and Trample till end of turn, which isn't as good with Raggadragga because then our mana dorks won't untap. But it's okay because they're going to have Vigilance, means they can tap anyway after they attack. For some creatures it may be a downside, but I think for others it's going to be an upside. But here's a mini Craterhoof buff that again still fulfills that 7 mana threshold for us to get a bonus from it. Hellkite Charger, when it attacks, we could pay 7 mana, 5 and 2 red if we do untap all attacking creatures, and after this phase there's additional combat phase. Here we go. Use our mana dorks that got untapped, pay the 7, another combat. And once we can get our creatures in the air, or once we can get things in the air, or enough things in the air, or enough things with trample, or enough things with a big buff, we're going to really start hurting our opponents. We can also pair things like Calcite Charger or a card we're going to talk about on a slide or two with something like Kamal, which says at beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 in game trample. Well, they're going to get +3/+3 in trample every combat that we take. So if we have abilities like that, then our creatures are just going to get bigger and bigger as we take these multiple combats. Carlock, whenever you attack, if it's the first combat phase, untap all attacking creatures, they get first strike, and there's additional combat. Again, just a way to hit hard and hit hard multiple times instead of just once. Overwhelming Stampede and Triumph, both great ways to try to alpha strike our opponents. Overwhelming Stampede giving +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. Triumph for the Hordes giving +1/+1 and Trample and Infector a whole board. Again, spells that are going to move us into combat and create a hard problem for our opponents to deal with and potentially knock the table out on that combat. Probably one of our best repeatable combats is Aggravated Assault for 5 mana and tap all creatures you control. If it's a main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by additional main phase. Activate only sorcery. Well, with enough mana dorks, if they can produce 5 mana and attack and stay alive, we have as many combats as we want to, and I think at that point, we're going to push towards just ending a game outright if our opponents get blocked. All we need is a Trample Enabler. All we need is a Kamal buff or a Crater Hoof buff or something like that, and this and things like Hellkite Charger are just gonna end the game outright because our opponents may have blockers, but they're never gonna have enough blockers. Garruk's Uprising can help give our whole board trample to help out with that buff from Raggadragga and other things. Rhythm of the Wild can give all of our creatures either haste or a +1/+1 counter when they come in, giving them the choice to swing the turn they come in if need be. And then the Natural Growth just pairs really well with these other abilities, doubling our power and toughness of each of our creatures during each combat. So that's pretty great. Again, if we could get that multiple combat setup going, well, now instead of a 4/4, they have to deal with an 8/8. And that's just something that's going to add up over time as we get into that multi-combat setup. But as I've said on the show, and I'll say it again, no deck's ever perfect. This is my version 1.0 version of the deck, and I think there's a lot of things we could learn in testing. And 2 cards I think I would really look at in testing, and by that I mean I would start to see where my ratios are, and if these effects are more necessary, I think I would happily put them in. The first is Zopendrel, Hunger Dominus, a 7 mana Phyrexian Horror that says at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control till end of turn. Here's another one of those unnatural growth effects, but this is a 7 mana creature, so it kind of plays both. I just wasn't sure how many non-Mandork slots we needed. You know, how many's too many, how many isn't enough. I think that's what we would learn in testing, and if we feel like we have too many, take one out. Bring something like this in, take a spell out, bring something like this in. And then Invasion of Ikoria, X and double green, when you cast it on the front side, when it comes in, search your library or graveyard for a non-human creature card with mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield. And if you search your library, so shuffle. Well, here's a way to get to that 7 mana threshold, get a creature we want, or go higher up and get the key creature we need. And then on the back side, if we flip it over, it allows us to assign combat damage as though our creatures won't blocked, just leading us again to, with that multi-combat angle, end the game even quicker. Then we have something like Song of Freyalise, which says on the first 2 rungs of the saga that creatures gain tap, add 1 mana color, making them creatures with a mana ability, giving them that buff for Raggadragga. And then on the third one, putting a counter on each creature we control, and they get Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible till end of turn. Again, maybe creating room for a big attack. Something you can see, we're trying to kind of hang our hat on mana dorks and also giving us an opportunity to do that Gruul thing and get to smashing. And I think more often than not, we're going to find some fun in that. But let's get into our play tests. Our first one, we are keeping a 2-lander with the Finhorn Elves. Crippled with the Right is going to give all of our creatures the ability to tap for mana, and turning on that Raggadragga buff. We have that Nissa, we have Garruk's Uprising for a little bit of draw and trample, and then Crack with Power. So a great hand. I think we start in a good spot here. Turn 1, we draw a Llanowar Elves. That's great. We're going to have multiple mana dorks by the time Raggadragga comes down. I love it. Turn 2, we will get that down there, and we'll get the Finhorn Elves down. Now this means we can turn 3 Raggadragga if we want to, or we can find other things to play. I don't really see any reason not to do it, right? Because it just means we can draw off Garruk's Uprising when it comes down, gives them the buff, puts them potentially out of damage range for things. I just think a turn 3 commander is not something you ever want to turn down. Here, I think I will just cast Raggadragga, get it down, get the buff here, and that means next turn we can start taking advantage of attacking with them and being able to use them for mana. Turn 4, it would have been ideal to get a mana, to get a, it would have been ideal, right, to get a land there, but that's okay. Let's see. If no one's got, let's think about this. If no one's got a blocker, I would plan to attack with Finhorn and Llanowar and untap them, and then main 2 use their mana, right? But if people have blockers, I would probably just cast something like, Fnatic Aronis and Cryptoth right now. But let's say that nobody has blockers. I would try to do, I was thinking, because we can do Fnatic before combat, have these 2 hit in during combat, and then main 2, play something like Cryptolith right down. Then they'll tap again. But hey, now everything has a mana ability. Everything's getting +2/+2 because of Raggadragga, although Fnatic Aronis already had it. Fnatic Aronis is now turned on to tap for 4 green mana on future turns since these guys are bigger, right? Since Raggadragga is a 4, right? So now we got a great setup, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana next turn. So we're starting to get close, right, to some of these abilities. We don't draw a land, but that's A-okay. Like I said, we have 8 mana, but again, we can attack and have them untap and still use the mana, right? So let me think about this. I like the idea of both Garruk's Uprising and Beastmaster Ascension, but there's really no good way to... Oh, okay, we do that. Let's tap the Forest, Mountain, and Raggadragga for Beastmaster Ascension, right? Get that down, get that started. Counters go on it every time one of our creatures attack. When it gets to 7, all of our creatures have flat +5/+5. Go to combat, swing with these 3. Again, I imagine on turn 5 we should have some pretty safe attacks for all of these, even with these being 3/3s. This would go up to 3 counters. They untap. Main 2, I've got, 6 mana? I would go Garruk's Uprising. That's going to draw me a card because of Raggadragga having power 4 or greater, right? And then I've got 3 more mana to use. I mean, we could Quarter Calling, but I don't really see a good use for that 3 mana, so I'd probably just keep them up to block. Again, Garruk's Uprising is great because now when we start playing these bigger things, like Vaultborn Tyrant, if we play that next turn to get that big buff, we have that. But hey, we're in a good spot. Next turn, we could potentially turn Beastmaster Ascension live, and now that Garruk's Uprising has Trample online, right now our attacks could just be devastating, especially if we swing out next turn. But let's go to turn 6 here. Don't see a ton of things I want to do before combat. I really would rather just go to combat, swing out, and turn Beastmaster Ascension on, right? Because this is going to get up to exactly 7 counters. Now, all of our creatures have +5/+5, and then the +2/+2 from Raggadragga. So 8/8, 8/8, 11/11, 7/11 with Trample. We're going to hit for a ton of damage. Remember, these guys untap themselves because of Raggadragga's ability. And now we're in a great spot. We've dealt a ton of damage. We're in a good position. And what I would probably do now is, now that I have all my mana to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 mana. I like the idea of Vaultborn Tyrant, but we already kind of missed, right, our window there with Raggadraggas. I'd probably just play something like Nissa. I know that we missed the trigger off of Raggadragga, but hey, come in, add a loyalty counter to make that token. Right, and that token comes in as in 8/8. And now next turn, remember that this has a mana ability because of Cryptoth, right? So now this isn't an 8/8, this is a 10/10 plus the Beastmaster Ascension when they attack. Or sorry, it's just flat +5/+5. So now it's even bigger, right? And now I would go to my turn here, and I mean, Overwhelming Stampede might even be the near perfect draw here, because we could just Overwhelming Stampede by tapping these, here for 4 and then 1 more for 5. I apologize, when that horror came in, we would have drawn off of Garruk's Uprising. I have no way to give like Selvala haste, otherwise that'd be fun. I don't really see a good finale or Quarter Calling trigger right here. I mean, I think at this point, Overwhelming Stampede would for sure knock at least 1 creature out, because or one player out, because this horror is a 8, 10, 15, 15. So everything's getting plus 15, plus 15. This is probably at least three players dead. Or sorry, at least two players dead, probably, depending on where the life's at turn 7. I mean, this is going to be a brutal attack. And then we just make another, make another horror if we want to draw another card, or again, I think this is a good place to stop. I think you kind of understand where our end game is here. Get the things down, get to Stompy, have some fun. Let's go to playtest 2, keeping a 2-lander, another Cryptolith Rite, Elven Chorus, which again is an enchantment that gives all of our creatures a mana ability, which is great. Paradise Druid, Birds of Paradise, and Goblin Arcane Man to reduce. And we see an Elysian Caryatid for another mana Dorks. So now we've got, our board state going potentially even wider with Raggadragga. I'll just play the birds turn 1. Turn 2 we see Sheltered Thicket. So my turn 2 play is probably just, if I do this, I can Goblin and Paradise Druid, right? So that might actually make more sense now I think about it. Goblin into Paradise Druid. Now we have 2 mana Dorks, right? We're getting that ground game set up. Turn 3. Forest, right? Play Raggadragga here. Now these guys all get the buff. Take the attack, or only these 2, right, get the buff. This doesn't have a mana ability. Attack with these 2, get them untapped. And then main 2, I would just play Cryptolith Rites. Now everybody's a mana ability, everybody's getting the buff. And then now all we need to is, again, find a critical mass, find some ways to start really getting in damage towards our opponents. Here I'd probably main 1, use these 3 to cast Elven Chorus, so I can look at the top card of my library and we can play creatures from the top. Well, a Beastmaster Ascension is great, right? That basically means that we can start planning for that next turn. So again, take an attack with Paradise Druid and Birds of Paradise, right? Get the mana back, and we can Boreal Druid and Elysian Caryatid, right? Get them both down, have them both getting ready to go. Next turn, we're 1 creature off Beastmaster Ascension, like we looked at in the top, but that's okay. I mean, now our opponents are going to be in tough shape, when we do get there. Turn 5, Thicket and tapped, Beastmaster Ascension. I would just swing out at this point. Yes, we only get up to 6 counters on the Beastmaster Ascension, but now our opponents really have to worry about that. Not a creature on top, but that's okay. We know the growth is coming, and that means next turn, Beastmaster plus that growth is probably just going to be very difficult, right, for our opponents to do. This is a turn 6 unnatural growth. We'll tap Raggadragga, I guess, with the mana for the growth. All of these attack, get the buff, and I think all we're missing at this point is a trample enabler of some sort. But again, Bird's Paradise is in the air, so it's going to start dealing big damage to our opponents. I like it. They're getting doubled. Probably all we need is trample. But again, that's okay. We see Jaya's next turn. Could put a bunch of mana into Jaya's. Again, I still like this spot. You've got setup. You've got your dark setup. You've got your attacking stuff set up. All we need is like a trample enabler for this to get even worse. But let me know, what do you think of Raggadragga down in the comment section below? Interesting deck. Not really something I ever thought of brewing until I was kicking around on EDH, but I think the deck's a ton of fun. MH3 gave it a little bit of support, and I'm sure we'll get more support soon, but I'd love to hear what you think, and I will catch you guys next time.